Had a very robust discussion with all of our experts at the last meeting, Dr. Gunn Logston, Dr. Walters, and Charlie Torini, our legislative advisor. Today, we'll get started with the official agenda in just a second, but I want to take a minute and welcome everybody. I think one of the things your new city council is very committed to doing is involving more people in the decision process and getting more input from the general public. I think Mayor Rickman has done an outstanding job with that so far. And really on that note, do we call the roll here, or we just note who all is in attendance? Okay, Mr. Taylor, Stephen Taylor is online with us. Perfect. Good to have Mr. Bennett and Ms. Hughes with us in person this time. You add a significant amount of gravitas to our group, so thank you very much. One of the things that's tradition at City Council is we open with a prayer, and we are very blessed and fortunate to have Reverend McDowell as a member of our committee. And unfortunately, I'm going to ask the mayor to pray for that one of the two certain things ceases to exist anymore in Columbia, and that's death and taxes. So, yes, bless us, President. But we know that in the midst of chaos there is development. Bless us individually and collectively. We ask it in your name. Amen. Thank you, Reverend. Before we get started with the agenda, if anybody on the committee has any comments they'd like to make before we get started, give you an opportunity. Scotty, James, Billy.
Obviously a good turnout.
All right, yeah. We're going to begin with Dr. Gunn Logston. I think one of the things we spent the time on last time was looking at how a property tax modernization and lowering the business taxes could be done in Richland County. And our mission has been, or our mantra has been to do this in a way that no one else's or no other taxes or fees were raised. And we specifically looked at the city last time, and I think today Dr. Gunn Logston is going to show us, just so we're comfortable, how it would affect the school districts first and the county, and then we'll move to a public comment period.
I had a lot of charts and data in the supplemental materials, and I've been asked to go through some of those this time, as well as Councilman Taylor mentioned, to look at some example implementation scenarios, not just for the City of Columbia, but also for Richland County and the two school districts. Before I begin, I just want to remind everyone why this is so important. The most recent Lincoln Land Institute study, which looks at the largest city in each state, and ours is Charleston, but we have the second lowest tax on owner-occupied residences. We have the 19th highest in Charleston on apartments across the whole United States. We have the highest differential between owner-occupied residences and apartments. And we have the fourth highest differential between owner-occupied residences and commercial properties. And that's in Charleston. The gap in Columbia is far greater, which puts us literally in the top of the nation on the differential between owner-occupied residence houses and apartments. So I also want to go through and just do a refresher of what we were talking about in terms of developing a competitive tax plan. And it's really 3 steps. 1, we offer a credit to all other real property, or to commercial and rental properties, that would have the effect of reducing the assessment rate from 6% to 4%, something that the Lincoln Land Institute recommended when they did a study specifically of South Carolina. We could model this after Act 40 of 2017, which did the exact same for manufacturing properties statewide and phased it in over a period of 6 years at the state level. The second part of this would be developing legislation. Initially, we're thinking about at the state level to enable counties the opportunity to implement this rate credit, and then also at the county level to opt into that state legislated rate exemption. Although since last time, I've had so many people come up to me with so many different ideas on other potential legal options to do this. So I think that we have even more options to look at for that. And then finally, the third step is really calculating the phase-in formula. How do we phase in that rate reduction over a period of time such that we do not have to raise taxes on anyone, and it is a slow phased-in approach. So, and that leads us to this. We're modeling this off of Dr. Stephen Walter's plan that he had developed for Baltimore. And essentially, we announce that we will have a phased-in 8-year period of reductions, and we will use the first 2 years to start building up an escrow account. Then we will use those escrow funds, if necessary, or as necessary, to fill in holes or any revenues that we are needed over the phased-in rate reduction. The other part of this is to enact a system of triggers. So if tax revenues start to come in faster, which is certainly the most likely scenario, then we would be able to advance this, and it would not take a total of 10 years, but could actually take place over a much shorter period of time. And the reason this is so, again, so important is here is the rental property tax disparity that you would see in Richland, and I did it for Richland School District 1 and 2, but the dark orange, that's how much an owner-occupied housing or house of $250,000 would pay in a year. If you're 65 and older, you get a reduction, so that's the lighter tan color. Now, if that same house is not owned, but it's actually rented out, immediately the property tax jumps up very significantly to $72.88 in Richland District 1 and $88.69 in Richland District 2. And if you're 65 and older and you're renting that place, there's no particular tax break for that, only owner occupied. So this is this huge, a significant difference. And it's really important because in the city of Columbia, we actually have a very high level of people who rent. 53% of the population in the city, within the city limits, are renters. And you can compare that to our other peer cities that we've been typically using throughout the study. And other than Greenville, we have the highest number of renters who face that particular high rental rate. Now they are property tax rate, and they don't necessarily know that they face it because it's not itemized on their rental bill. But that is what's assessed on the properties in which they live. And so, and we went through this, but we talked about the effect that these high property tax rates have on reducing the investment in these rental properties and commercial properties, and which ultimately leads to reductions in population and jobs and employment. And I know we went through all of that and how we lagged that with our other peer cities last time, and I don't want to necessarily dwell on that again. But you can see that the city of Columbia and Richland County have had significantly lower population growth since 2010 than our peer cities. And then the other point is it's very interesting that we see these different dynamics going on in School District 1 and School District 2. We see a lot of people moving to School District 2 and our schools and our student population growing dramatically out there. But in School District 1, you actually see that we are losing population and losing owner-occupied housing as well. And in fact, if we look at owner-occupied property growth, you can see in Richland School District 1, since 2010, we've seen a decline of 5% in the number of units that owner-occupied property units. And in Richland District 2, we've seen a growth of 11%. And so, and that very much shows the dynamics of our community, where we have a lot of people living in Richland District 1, but commuting and working in Richland District, I'm sorry, living in Richland District 2, but commuting and working in Richland District 1. You can see the average value of owner-occupied homes has actually grown more in District 1 than it has in District 2. And then finally, the total assessed value has grown, and this is particularly important, the total assessed value, so all the units and their value combined has grown only 6.6% in District 1 and 13.8% in District 2. But look at that compared to our other peer cities. York has grown 40%, Lexington 54%, Charleston 73%, and Greenville 36%. We have lagged dramatically in terms of growth. If we look at the exact same thing with commercial and rental property growth, we see sort of the opposite trends. We see that Richland District 1 has gained more commercial property than District 2. But again, and you can see that York 3 and Lexington 1 actually are very similar in terms of losing commercial property, because they are sort of housing communities where people live and commute elsewhere. And then you can see average value. Our average value of our commercial properties has not grown nearly as much, in some cases less than half as much as our peer cities. And then a total assessed value, again, same thing. We have seen dramatically slow growth compared to our peer cities. So the other thing that I think I was asked to go through was how might an implementation plan look over a course of 10 years. So we're starting with selected revenues of the City of Columbia, and I showed this last time, and I was asked to actually show general fund revenues specifically, so which is the next slide. But so you can see, what makes up the City of Columbia's general fund revenues. You see the middle right there, per capita inflation adjusted, you can see that property tax makes up a relatively small portion of the overall general fund revenues to the City of Columbia. And then on the right-hand side, you can see historic growth, and the growth is broken down by pre-pandemic and then all the way through the pandemic as well. So if we phase this in over a period of, again, 10 years, so we start with our current year, phase it in, first 2 years we just escrow, and then starting in year 3, we begin to drop the commercial property tax rate. So what you're looking at right here, so let's say all the blue is property tax revenue. The dark blue is commercial property tax revenue, and the light blue is property tax revenue from all of the other sources. And we're assuming that this is a very base case scenario where the same slow growth that's been happening all this period of time is still going to continue forward. As opposed to announcing that we have a big property tax cut and we have a lot more investment take place, which is what is the actual likely to happen, more likely to happen. Then you also see the tan on the top is all of the other revenues. But what if everything grows at the same rate that it has historically for the past 10 years, this is where we would end up. Instead of, we would end up with revenues that grow at an average of average compounded rate growth of 4.5%. Now, property tax revenues would have been up and down and then been relatively low. If the property grows at the same assessed rate, we would see a total of 1.7% annual compounded growth. So commercial property tax would decrease a little bit over that time period, but total property tax would still increase 1.7% annualized. So again, and this is the very base case, most conservative, assuming that we don't have an influx of more investment because we have provided the exemption. So the same thing can be done with Richland County. Again, these are selected revenues of Richland County and their historic growth rates over time. So one of the things, Richland County is a little different. Actually, first of all, let me just say, effectively, we have the exact same type of formula for Richland County that we do for the City of Columbia, and you'll see for the school districts. We have the exact same type. We're using their specific historic growth rates for their specific property types within that, within the county. And but the biggest thing you'll see is that property tax makes up a bigger portion of their revenues than they do for the City of Columbia. And the other thing about Richland County is they have, not only do they have some property tax flowing into the general fund, they also have property tax flowing into the non-major governmental funds, which include debt service, and it can include special revenue funds, which would be fire and the library and a number of other things. So this includes all of that. It shows you, again, we have the very same type of growth. If, again, nothing changes, we have the same very base case, slow continued growth, we still are projecting 2.9% annualized compounded growth in Richland County. Yes.
I just want to reinforce that because Dr. Walters, when he was here, and I believe he's joined us online today, has basically shown us in other cities that have reduced their property taxes to competitive numbers, they've seen fairly exponential growth in new investments and tax revenue. And for these models, we're just showing the historical with no acceleration whatsoever from making ourselves more able to compete with other cities for new investments and things like that.
Yes, yes. And so, and that's a good point. I mean, thank you for pointing that out. So, because the model does allow you to scale it. So what if we assume we have an extra, just 5% growth per year, and then you'll immediately, just with that, you would see that all of the revenues that would potentially be, abated or exempted would be immediately made up by increased revenues that are flowing in from the new development. So yes, this is, I would want to say this is the most base, slowest case scenario.
An additional, and when we started, and you started looking at this, and Dr. Walters started looking at this a year ago in the initial committee, I think the goal at the time was a 25% reduction. And what we're finding now, which I think is just important to point out, that we believe that it's fairly easy to get to a 33% reduction at the end of 10 years, which would put a 4%, a net, since assessment rates are constitutional and you can't reduce the assessment rate, it would produce an effective rate of 4%, which is the same as owner-occupied housing.
That's exactly right.
And if I remember, and if I'm correct, North Carolina, as an example, has a standard 4% assessment rate across the board.
Yes, North Carolina does not have the varying assessment rates like we do. They have the same assessment rate for all properties. Yes, that is correct.
Sorry to interrupt.
No. I should say, if anyone has any questions at any time, please just,
Let me ask you this. Is that contingent and hinges on phase-in? That will equivocally change over a period of time. Does that hinge on the phase-in?
The amount that?
Yes.
Yes. So the idea is that, again, for this very base case, the phase-in would ultimately, if you go from 6% to 4%, that's a 33% reduction. That puts us on par with Greenville. That puts us, better than Rock Hill. That puts us on par with all of our, peers within the state. And yes, if, again, everything goes at a slow historical rate, that would take place after 10 years. Again, and Dr. Waltz, I wish he were here, but, he has done extensive research on all of these cities throughout the nation who have enacted these property tax cuts. And in all of those cases, the take-up in investment was immediate and large. As soon as investors and developers realized that the property tax cut was indeed permanent and could, and viable, they flooded in with new investment, which dramatically increased the property tax revenues. One of the things he said that some of the cities didn't do is they didn't necessarily build up an escrow. And so when they found that they were short for the first couple of years until all of those revenues started flowing in. So again, base case scenario, it would take 10 years to get the 33% reduction. If we use the system of triggers and we get all of that new investment, I really see this speeding up and taking 4 or 5 years, or maybe half the time, to get to the 33% reduction.
Let me just reinforce that, because we have a fairly significant number of commercial real estate folks and developers with us today that, again, what you're showing here is just simply based on a historical growth rate. Mm-hmm. So if we can lower, we demonstrate a firm commitment to lower our taxes, and the same thing happens to Columbia that happened to San Francisco when they did theirs, mm-hmm. and our audiences here go out and bring that, that new investment, those new hotels, those new office buildings or whatever, we can, the more we bring, the more we drive down the rates each year. In other words, it doesn't have to take 10 to get to 33. Comment, Mr. Mayor?
No, I agree with you 100%.
That's what I say. So we can enhance our own destiny by really selling what we're doing here.
Absolutely.
And bringing in more. And that's going to apply to the county, to the city,
yes.
and to across the board, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, it does.
All right, so the last couple of slides are the school districts. So this is Richland District 1. We see we see their gross revenues by source since, for the past 10 years. Property tax is a very large percentage of their revenues. If you look at the per student inflation adjusted, you see in 2021, it was almost $13,000 per student in property tax revenues, and then a total of $21,000 per student in total revenues that include state revenues and federal, and there's a little bit of other local revenues as well. And just for comparison, you see Richland District 1 at $21,000 per student versus the other peer districts, and then the state average is $15,259 per student. But here's how Richland 1 would look, which again is no surprise. It's very similar to the other groups. And again, for the base case, continuing the slow historic growth, even phasing this in over 10 years, we still see total property tax grow 0.6%, and we see total revenues grow 1.7%. Compounded annually. Richland District 2, a little bit different, does not have the same percentage of property tax revenue that Richland District 1 has. It makes up, far less than half of the total per student spending. Overall, Richland District 2 spends $15,600 per student, and that was in school year 2021. And you can see that again versus all of the other peer districts and the state average. And then again, here's Richland District 2. You can see there the implementation is, again, for the slow historic growth rates is such that even if we don't see this huge pickup in commercial property growth, which would be highly unlikely, but we would still see property tax revenues grow 1.1% compounded annually, and total revenues 3.8% compounded annually. So that's it in terms of, just going through, again, more data and numbers, but I'm happy to go through even more data and numbers if anybody wants. Or if you have questions, or if you want to
Questions
see
from the
something
committee?
different sometime.
Mr. Bennett? Questions? Hughes? River?
The historical growth rate, which I think is very significant as we talk through where we are and where we want to be. When I look at the historical growth rate comparatively to District 1 and 2, there is a significant increase in the data historically and proposed. Could you talk to me a little bit about that, Doctor?
So, yes, so the historical growth rate, I mean, we're looking really at two sets of historic growth rates. One is property values. How much have we seen property values grow historically over the past 10 years? And I've divided that out into commercial because that's where we're targeting versus all other property value. And that, we do have data that is specifically Richland 1 and specifically Richland 2, and we can see how much commercial property is in 1 versus 2. And so we use those, the growth rate of total property value to help us anticipate what might be future growth and how to calculate property taxes. The other thing that we use is we actually go into the consolidated annual financial reports and pull out specific revenues and get, make sure that our numbers are matching up with their numbers. But then, so they also receive state revenues which come from a variety of different streams, and they receive federal revenues. They have some interest revenues, and then there are some local revenues. Those are very, very small. And so the historical growth rates of all revenue streams are used to identify those historical growth rates. I don't know if that answered your question, but, okay. Oh, sure.
What's the parameter of time when we start talking about historical growth rate? What's the parameter of time we're looking at? What's the framework?
Typically, I like to use 10 years.
Okay.
But I will say I have, with the pandemic, I have adjusted. Some have seen their revenues go dramatically up and some dramatically down. And so I have adjusted it to take the most conservative historical estimate, whether it's pre-pandemic or post-pandemic.
Would you take just a quick second, and because so many people are with us today, just a little bit more detail on the purpose of the escrow funds and the purpose that they will serve, just so we all have a clear
Sure,
understanding.
yes, no, and sorry, I probably just pick up where I left off last time. But, so, the escrow fund, so year 1 and 2, it was, the thought was that, and again, this is, Dr. Walter's brainchild, so I don't want to take credit for this, but the idea is that you announce the tax cut and you have the legislation such that developers and investors know it's going to take place and they feel confident that it's not going to, they have the confidence that it's going to be a permanent tax cut. And then, but you announce it, that won't happen right now, but it's going to happen in a couple of years. So we spend, and which they know in a couple of years, they're going to have the tax cut, and they start investing and developing right away. And so we spend the first couple of years simply taking the excess revenues from property tax and putting it in an escrow fund, so that when the first first increment of the tax exemption or tax credit goes into effect in the year 3, we have built up extra funds that in the event there's not enough coming in, that we can use that to fill in the hole. Again, with triggers, if you build up a lot more and then your first tax cut you have, and you still have, you meet all of your spending requirements and you still have additional ones, then your trigger could come in and say, well, instead of the same incremental reduction next year, we're going to make a larger incremental reduction. And that's how we get this move to a much shorter, compressed time frame.
Any other questions?
Councilman Taylor? Councilman Taylor, can you hear me?
Is that Dr.
This is Steve
Walters?
Walters. No. Yes, I have a comment. It follows on the timing questions that are here, and I want to, if Dr. Gunlogson can go back to her slide 10, I want to address some of the questions with slide 10. My compliments to Dr. Gunlogson for assembling an incredibly rich, persuasive amount of data here. You guys are really lucky to have such a talented economist advising you. But the one thing I want to stress here is that people might be thinking that, well, this is kind of a complicated plan, and the safe thing to do is to do nothing. And one of her tables here shows you that, in fact, doing nothing is potentially disastrous. And I want to go to that slide 10. And, you've heard the expression about the canary in the coal mine. I'm not sure the canary's dead here, but the canary has stopped singing. If you look at per capita inflation adjusted, essentially these are tax revenues in the city of Columbia, but they reflect what's going on with the tax base. And Dr. Gunlogson's data shows those blue bars in that table show that you've got a declining amount of property tax revenue in real inflation adjusted terms, per capita terms, and that shows that you've got a shrinking tax base in these terms. And I've never studied any city anywhere that's been healthy with a shrinking property tax base. When the property tax base is shrinking, and essentially it's a sign of ill health, it's a sign that you've got investment repellent, that you're not attracting enough new investment to bring new businesses, new affordable housing in the form of apartments and so forth. Jobs evaporate, and the existing stock of capital starts to depreciate as it's not replaced, and so on. This is, I think, the best sign, the best indicator that you've got to do something here to address this investment repellent problem, because with a shrinking tax base, everything else that the government tries to do, the amount of services that it can provide, the quality of those services, the quality of its schools, and so much else will decline. So this, I invite everybody in the audience. I think Dr. Gunlogson will make a copy of these slides available at some point. Take a really good hard look at that, and then there's lots of other data in terms of how Columbia and Richland are doing relative to other counties and areas in South Carolina. This really is a pressing problem, and doing nothing really is not an option.
Thank you, Dr. Walters. Excuse me. Our clerk of council, Ms. Erica, will post all the slides today. They've already been posted on the city website, so everybody will have access. Thank you, Dr. Gunlogson. We're very fortunate to have you as a Columbia resident. I get more impressed every time you speak to us. Just so for the media in the room, Dr. Gunlogson will be available after we finish for any comments, and she does a great job answering questions. So any of our guests here that have direct questions, I think she'd be more than happy to work with you on them. It's, I guess, time for our public comments. Unless anybody has any questions, I will call our most illustrious two-time director of the South Carolina Department of Revenue, a renowned tax lawyer, Mr. Bernie Maybank.
Thank you. Well, we got a handout. We'll hand out to you. Andrew, if you'll give them the handouts there. I've got a paying client at 11:30, so I'm going to speak for my 3 minutes and scoot. So, Andrew, will you give them the handouts here? So we have some handouts for you.
And Bernie, if it's okay, we'll scan your handout and put it online as well.
Okay. I was going to go through my handouts. So the first, and I'll go into it. Some of what I'm going to tell you all is duplicative. You probably heard it 3 or 4 times, but I thought it was good. The Lincoln Institute is the only ranking that includes commercial and industrial properties. There are a variety of rankings, 50 state rankings for residential property, but the Lincoln Institute is the only one for commercial and industrial. They look at the largest city in each state, which for years is Columbia. It's now Charleston, and now they've now shifted to Charleston. They also look at one rural town, which has always been Mullins. When they looked at Columbia, Columbia had the highest property taxes in the entire United States on manufacturers. They've now shifted to Charleston. So the first slide, it shows you where the problem is. Urban primary resident in Charleston, where 53 is the lowest property taxes in the country because they use the largest city in each state, and they also use Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York. Charleston is 52nd. So the tax rate is 52nd. The tax bill is 46th. It says tax rate, that should be tax bill. And so it's the next lowest property taxes on primary residents in the entire United States of the largest cities in each state, and that shifts the property tax burden over to everybody else, primarily commercial, because manufacturers typically will get incentives. The next slide is commercial property tax rankings. If you look at Charleston was 27th in the country, and to repeat, 53rd is the lowest, number 1 is the highest. By contrast, North Carolina was 51st. So if you're competing for a project in York or Lancaster, one of those counties, you're competing against, the 51st, almost the lowest property taxes in the country on commercial. The next slide, Chicago and Aurora, that was in Chicago's newspaper today, so I just put it in there. You will see Charleston is listed on there on high commercial property tax rates. Rural, it's a lot worse. Mullins, South Carolina, second highest property taxes in the entire United States for commercial, for a small commercial, 4th highest in the United States for a medium and a large commercial building. So commercial property taxes are tough in South Carolina. If you look at the next slide, apartments, Charleston's 19th, where again, number 1 is the highest, 53rd is the lowest. Poor Mullins is 4th in the United States for commercial property tax rates on apartments. Then where the rubber really hits the road, if you look at the taxes on commercial versus primary residence, South Carolina is the 4th highest differential in the country. Last year we were 2nd, so we've actually improved a bit. So if you had a $300,000 primary residence home and a $300,000 law office, that tax differential is the 4th highest in the United States. If you look at apartment versus primary residence, South Carolina is the highest in the entire United States. And that's got to be a racial component to that. If you assume African Americans rent more than Caucasians, number 1 in the country in the property tax differential between apartment and primary residence. The main reason I wanted to come today was to refute the notion that it's the city of Columbia's taxes that are causing the problem. Now, when you get your tax bill, it's combined. You're going to have the city, the county, and the school district. Fitz News did a screed against the city of Columbia about a year ago. I sent them a lengthy email how wrong they were. But the taxes for the city of Columbia are only 15% higher. The millage for the city of Columbia is only 15% higher than Charleston and Columbia. The differential is the county is 227% higher. Richland County is 227% higher than Charleston, and Richland County is 213% higher than Greenville. We've given you 2021 through 2017, so you can see it there. School District 1, the tax differential, 218% higher than Charleston. School District 2, 287% higher. School District 3 is 208% higher than Charleston, and a little bit less than that compared to Greenville. The municipal property taxes is 115%. So the city taxes are only 15% higher than Charleston and 15% higher than Greenville. And we've given you the county-based millage and the city-based millage. The county and the city today have the legal ability to lower property taxes. You can do it on existing ones, but you could do it on principally what they do for every manufacturer. Every month, Richland County gives a property tax incentive to a manufacturer. And so that's called a multi-county business park with a special source revenue credit. So the special source revenue credit is usually expressed in terms of a percentage. Doesn't have to be, but it usually is. So a 50% special source revenue credit is a 50% reduction of the tax bill. The county does that every month for manufacturers, not 50% of course, but every month they give a special source revenue credit to a manufacturer. Many of the commercial projects in Richland County are larger, have a larger capital investment than the manufacturer does. Now, the manufacturer has a lot of jobs, and commercial typically does not, except through their tenants. So you have the legal ability today to lower property taxes in Richland County. The county passes the ordinance, and the city has to consent to it. So the county's already done this twice. Student housing, Martin Moore pointed out, he had a very large student housing project. He pointed out the tax rate versus Chapel Hill, Charlottesville, Tallahassee, and a couple of other university towns. And so the county agreed to give a 50% special source revenue credit, 50% reduction of the property tax bill. You had to meet the student housing ordinance, which is expensive, and you had to have, I think it was a $65 million minimum capital investment. In return for that, your property tax rates were cut in half. Ned Sloan filed a lawsuit against that, saying that was unconstitutional, that incentive should be limited to manufacturers, and both the Circuit Court and the Court of Appeals ruled in our favor. I represented the city in that. That's sunsetted, so that student housing ordinance. So what they did is the county passed a resolution saying, you build a student housing project, you meet the requirements of the student housing ordinance and your $65 million, we'll give you a 50% special source revenue credit. The city passed a resolution saying they would do the same thing. The county currently has it for public infrastructure. So for commercial buildings, you can get a 50% special source revenue credit capped at your public infrastructure expenses. Now, public infrastructure is public road, water, and sewer. The great majority of them done in the city of Columbia don't need that, but it don't have any need for public infrastructure because it's already there. But that is county council today. My obsession is with worker housing, not Section 8 housing, worker housing. And the city of Greenville and Greenville County Council gave us a multi-county business park, 50% special source revenue credit for a beautiful 8-story building in downtown Greenville that had 25% worker housing. It's not an honor code. The special source revenue credit was revoked if they didn't comply with that. The definition of worker housing varies. Y'all can set what worker housing is, but the Housing Authority publishes those statistics annually. So that is something to think about. So what you would do if you wanted to encourage worker housing, you would get the county to pass a resolution, which is non-binding, that says if you build an apartment complex that costs over, say, $25 million, and 25% of it is dedicated to worker housing, we'll give you a special source revenue credit. So you can do that today. If it's in the city would have to consent to it. So as a student housing, you would both the city and the county would pass a resolution saying we will do it. I think my 3 minutes is up. Do we have time for any questions? So the bottom line is that the city's millage is not higher. It's only 15% higher than the city of Greenville and the city of Charleston. It's the county and the school district millage that's higher, and of course you get the tax bill, you're going to get all three of them on there. Y'all have the legal ability today to lower property tax rates. Typically it's done only for new commercial buildings. You would set a minimum $25 million, $40 million, and would give it to worker housing.
Bernie, thank you for coming. Just as a reference, go ahead, James.
One question, Bernie. So you started out by talking about how the county is driving the increase in taxes. And then we went to the two school districts over 200%. And then we talked about working housing. I think when we look at the school districts, we almost have a tale of two cities there. And there's a lot of talk already about Richland 1 and Richland 2. So how do you protect the kids and get to something great as working housing without throwing the baby out with the bath?
It would be done only for new worker housing. So there'd be nothing there today. They built a $45 million building their taxes would go up, of course, dramatically up, but they would be just paying less taxes than they otherwise would. If you hear the developers saying it's got to be true because worker housing ain't being built, the numbers just simply don't work. The taxes are so high. Worker housing, the numbers simply don't work. Section 8 housing, you get all kind of credits. Worker housing, state and federal credits, worker housing, you don't.
With your years of experience in taxes, any recommendation how you get the school district tax down?
See, their taxes are their tax collections are going to go up. By definition, there's 45 million, and I just randomly throw out $45 million. By definition, they're going to get taxes on $45 million more than they did the prior year because only new buildings count. So it'd be new taxes, and so they would get, a significant increase in taxes on new construction.
Mr. Mayor, but you would agree that all those special source revenue credits and so forth really don't help small business?
They don't.
That we have to look at a global type reduction to help small business, owners of rental homes, because I think what are the minimums, just for the record, on FILOs and small FILOs what now?
Well, legal minimum's $2.5 million, but no county's going to give you a FILO for just
That's
$2.5
my point.
million.
That's my point. So for the small businesses that are growing one employee at a time, one machine at a time, we really don't have a program for them today in the state of South Carolina.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions for Bernie? Thank you so
And we'll
much
put
for
our
coming.
extra hands out there for anybody who wants to.
That's right. And I did want to recognize Andrew Salibi, your associate who joined with you today. Our next up, and we're going to try, Bernie gets because he was 2 terms at DOR, he got 2 3-minute slots. We try to hold him to 3 minutes. Clayton Mazingo, thank you for coming.
No, thanks for having me. Tough act to follow. I'll make this super brief. So I'm a Second 50 Communities. We're the developer and owner of Merrill Gardens in Bull Street, senior living building. We've got projects in Charleston, building in Greenville, and here. And we've got a whole entire, national portfolio. Our taxes for the specific property here were $522,000 this year. That ends up being roughly $5,172 per apartment, or $431 a month. So we have to, we actually do create jobs for an owner-operator. So typically in a building we put in, we have 35 jobs. We've had to get creative and kind of change the structure in our buildings from independent living to assisted living with residents that will impact the school system. In Charleston, our same building, which is actually bigger and has 38 more units, we're paying $260 per occupied unit per month. So kind of the same math he was just doing. We've got the ability, we'd love to do more projects. We've got another phase to add onto our building, which would go from, which is, close to a $45 to $50 million investment in downtown Columbia. But we've got it. To do that, we'd probably create, right now we've got about 35 jobs. We'd create another 15 to 20 jobs. We'd love to do that. We've got to figure out, a path forward, because with the tax rates where they are, it's very challenging to try to do that with all the other factors, construction pricing, land pricing, everything else you can put in there. So it's not just taxes, there's a lot of other factors. But this is one of the highest taxes we pay over a portfolio of about 115 properties.
Just to repeat, in Charleston, you're at
Charleston, I'm at
$260 a month?
$260 per unit, $3,117 per apartment. Here I'm $5,172 per apartment.
Just curious, does that translate into higher rents here?
Lower rent.
Lower rents?
Yeah. Well, if you look at the income demographics of where your building is. So I mean, you look at your your cost of building. Charleston's more expensive than Columbia without the taxes. So when you're covering that cost on the investment, you're going to have to get higher rents in those types of markets. I mean, our rents are probably 15 to 20% lower here with higher tax rate.
With higher taxes. Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Kim Person? Is Kim Persons here? Kim Persons, I'm sorry. Rox Pollard? Thank you for coming, Rox.
Good morning. I'm Rox Pollard. I'm with Collier's Commercial Real Estate. Some of my colleagues are here with us today and other colleagues from other offices in the same industry here in Columbia. I want to thank you all for what you're doing and for the public service and the time that you're committing to this, because the rest of us are unwilling to do it. That's why we're sitting over here. Thank you all for what you're doing. I specialize in retail real estate, and by that I mean shopping centers or retail buildings, which that's the one type of commercial real estate that 100% of the population interacts with. Everybody does something in it, some type of retail real estate. When I look at, or when we look at projects, and Scotty's in this business too, around the state, our taxes here are really obscenely high. Even between here and Lexington County, they're obscenely high. And the impact that has is on a shopping center on Forest Drive, for example, we have a brand new project which the Beach Company built, which is a spectacular project on the landscape in Columbia, South Carolina, and then a project right next door that Lowe's Food occupies that's also a spectacular project. Because the Beach Company project was new and has new investment, and to Mr. Mozingo's point, new building receipts for what they paid, their taxes are over twice as high as the property that shares the same parking lot with them. So that is an uneven playing field for those commercial developers that want to bring those type of projects to the city of Columbia. And it gets far worse than that. If you look at small buildings that occupy out parcels on shopping centers in the city of Columbia and Richland, these prices, their tax rates can be as much as $10 or $12 per square foot, as compared to the same building in the Myrtle Beach market where the taxes would be $3 or $4 per square foot. So from the standpoint of developers and investors and where they want to spend their money, obviously they're not going to choose to do that in a tax oppressive environment like we have here if they can expend those same dollars in other markets within South Carolina. And we are fortunate. South Carolina is an in-migration state. We saw that in the last census. We have a lot to be proud of and a lot to be thankful for. But to Mayor Rickman and Councilman Taylor's platforms as they're running, we have to equalize and level our playing field to attract those businesses. I don't want to use up more than my 3 points. This occurred to me. I'm from Greenville like Scotty is, and in the last week I was in Greenville, Columbia, Charleston, and Myrtle Beach, all within a few days of each other. And as Daniel said many times in his campaign, there are cranes and growth and building going on everywhere until you drive back in from any direction from Columbia. We have one crane that's on a student housing project, and we're glad to have that. We are the most horizontal city in the state of South Carolina, maybe in the southeast, because we don't have that growth. So, is that my time? Anyway, what I was going to say, I'll close out. What occurred to me, most simply stated, is Columbia is a not-for-profit economy. Because most of our jobs have a disproportionate amount are state, federal, and local governments, which are good jobs and stabilizing jobs, that's not a growth industry, and it's not a for-profit industry, and it's not where those people that are renting from Mr. Mozingo can pay at least what they're paying in Charleston or more. They can't rent all those apartments that are being built in Greenville. So although what we're doing here, what you are doing here, hopefully will lead to that for-profit economy, one that has where we can keep those young people that are graduating this weekend from the University of South Carolina down the street.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. We appreciate you coming. Ms. Donna Green. Welcome, Ms. Green.
Thank you. I'm Donna Green. I'm a small business owner. I purchased a property on Divine Street in 2008, and I have sold that property, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of insight as to what I experienced there. And it was a house down in the commercial part, $450,000 house. My property taxes were $14,000 a year. And, you know, what I experienced was that properties around me had ownership, long-term ownership, and they had tax caps. And so the people on either side of me were paying a third of what I was paying in taxes. Because, you know, the assessment thing, and when the assessment value took over in, 2007. You buy a property and you get zapped with it. I paid, my very first year, I paid twice what the person I bought it from. And I just wanted to just kind of say that, in that I saw a huge inequity in property. And the 11 years that I was there, I saw over 40 businesses close on Vine Street. And I would write them down every time one closed. And many of those buildings stayed vacant for a long, long time. Anyway, I did a little, and if I lived there, my taxes would have been $3,500. Wow. And because I didn't live there, and I lived in Lexington, I couldn't vote on anything that affected my property or my business. Anyway, the tax cap thing, I understand all that, but when it can only raise a certain amount and people own their property for 20 years, they just kind of get locked into a gradual increase, but then if you sell that building, all of a sudden you're zapped. And so, anyway, I don't know if you want to, I did all my.
Sure, please.
Absolutely.
You'll give that to Mr. Palin?
Yep, okay.
And let me say, thank you for coming. I tell you, I think, I built up.
We kind of get ignored.
Well, and I would just say to you, I was very fortunate to build a business in Columbia myself. And I do think, like Mr. Maybank was talking earlier, there are all kind of programs for big businesses.
Right.
But $14,000 a year property tax on a small business, it's a lot of working capital you could use to grow with, isn't it?
Well, and I bought this business from someone 16 years ago when I was on Rosewood, and I believed that the best way for me to grow my business was to own my property. And I found that not to be true. So I have downsized my business, and I'm now in Cottontown. But the thing is that when you own your building and you operate your business out of your building that you own, you are not generating any kind of revenue. And to me, that, when I look at who's next door to me, who's renting all their spaces, they're at least generating revenue. I wasn't generating any revenue, and you can't even deduct your mortgage payment and all that. And so you kind of get double whammy.
Ms. Green, it'd be great if you'd give a plug to your business, because it is Small Business Week, and we want to promote small businesses, so everybody.
Southern Pottery. And I actually, in my transition move, sorry to say that my gallery kind of went away, and now I just teach classes.
Well, I missed the gallery. There were a
I know,
lot
I
of
missed it
Mother's
too.
Day presents that I bought there.
But, especially with Mother's Day coming up, right? But I felt like I got double whammy with the fact that I don't get the same deductions that a renter gets, but I don't generate any revenue.
Well, thank you every small business in Columbia thanks you for coming today. Matt Poindexter? And let me ask you, if you would, when you come to the podium, adjust the microphone to where we can make sure we hear and record what you say, and if you would state your name and the company that you're with.
Sure thing. Good morning. My name is Matt Poindexter. I'm with Profit Dixon Partners based in Charlotte, North Carolina. In preparation to speak with you today, I dug up and memorized an email that I received in August of 2019, which I think is very relevant here. Memorization is not my strong suit, but I think I'm going to get this right. The email read, "Hey, Matt, that's me. Hope you're well. Property taxes are too high. We're a pass. Thanks, Kevin." So let me start with that. So who's Kevin, and what was he responding to? Kevin was responding to two investment memorandums that I had sent him a couple of months prior to that, in kind of the middle of 2019, for a project now known as the Benedict Bull Street, which we're developing currently in the Bull Street District. Kevin is a managing director for a multi-billion-dollar private equity real estate investment fund that specializes in multifamily investments throughout the country. We've worked with Kevin on multiple deals. They're very savvy and disciplined investors that dig into deals all across the country and look at things down to the dollar that's spent in terms of projections and pro formas. So my name, again, Matt Poindexter with Profit Dixon Partners. We specialize in multifamily development throughout the Southeast, primarily in the Carolinas and Tennessee. We've done in excess of about $1 billion over the last 10 years. The Benedict Bull Street project, even though Kevin passed on this deal, did end up getting capitalized and financed. We're under construction now, which we're very excited about. But the only reason it was able to get financed and approved was ultimately because we were one of the first projects to qualify for the city-county public infrastructure tax credit agreement, which afforded us a 50% reduction of our property tax bill over the next 10 years. Without that, this project would not have started. It's a $67 million project that required $24 million of equity. So now that I've shared that, let me really drill down into the numbers and try to quantify what the taxes are comparative to what we see in other markets. My assumption in about a year and a half ago on what our per unit taxes might be here in Columbia, which I'm very fearful I've underassumed at this stage given some of what I've heard today, was $4,781 per unit upon completion. So lock that in your mind if you would, $4,781. I've got 5 projects in other southeastern markets that are very similar in scope, scale, size, and quality to what Benedict Bull Street will be. And I'll share with you those tax amounts for each of those deals. 2 projects are in Nashville, Tennessee. Their per unit taxes or projected taxes based on 2021 assessments were $2,859 and $3,582. That's 50% and 30% less, respectively, comparative to what our projection is for Columbia. I've got 1 project in downtown Greenville, South Carolina. Per unit taxes were $3,143, 41% less than what we project they will be here in Columbia. I've got 2 projects in Charlotte. Per unit taxes for 2021 were $2,751 per unit and $2,354 per unit. That's 54% and 68% less than what we're projecting for here in Columbia. So there's a trend there that's developed. Property taxes are by far the largest operational expense for any multifamily community. It's a massive driver as to whether or not an investment opportunity works. Our company, sadly, is not currently pursuing a new opportunity here in Columbia. We'd like to change that. However, we can't do so unless the operational expenses are lower, specifically the property taxes, because currently they're far higher than what we see in any of our other markets.
Any questions? Billy?
Yeah. Well, if I'm on it. I think, Dr. Gunlaugson, your theory, on the growth is the traditional growth, but that this change in the tax base would accelerate the growth. And so you've said, basically kind of said that. I'm just curious from everybody out there what you think the growth would be on it if we did lower the taxes, where if you predict that we would have higher growth and we'd be able to then use some of those triggers to get the tax rate down quicker.
Great question. It's hard for me to quantify citywide how that might be impacted. I can tell you from our perspective, if we heard that a tax reduction had been put in place that would get us in line with other markets, we would immediately begin a site search for a new multifamily project here. Most of our projects are $50 million up. We go anywhere up to $150 million. We've never done a one-off deal in a market and not come back and do a second deal. I don't want Columbia to be the first case where that happens, but that's really what we would need is some kind of break on the property taxes to do so.
Thank you, Matt. And I just want to just repeat what I think I heard you say. Had it not been for the discount, you wouldn't have been here to begin with.
Right.
And if we don't fix this, there ain't going to be a number 2.
Sadly, I think that's the case for us at least.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Appreciate
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Mr. Hal Stevens. Hal's another locally built small family business. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Councilman, members of the committee. Just 2 things. Do your best to try to be even with the small guys. I think you've already mentioned that you're doing that. We have a commercial property owner in in the Vista, and we've had that for a long time. And of course, nobody likes taxes, but we want to just be treated as well as we can. Secondly, we did at one time, we live in Melrose Heights and have in the same house for about 26 years, and we bought a quadruplex behind our house. It had been run down a little bit, so we thought we would invest in that. We found out that we couldn't afford to have somebody else manage it because of the taxes, and certainly putting any kind of money to improve that place just made it like we can't do this. So I think there are lots of small property owners around town who maybe there's some special things that can be done to get them to put money back into their properties, maybe special breaks for small investors like that. I know Billy would know more about that than most of us, but just wanted to put those 2 words into you and appreciate what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Hal. We appreciate all you've done for Columbia, and I do think you raise a great point that taking and fixing up and making neighborhoods look better sometimes and we forget that rental homes and apartments are classed the same way as commercial buildings, and so it's almost like you're punished double for the property tax on your improvements and the differential in the rate. So thank you for bringing that up. George McCutcheon.
Hey, George McCutcheon, Wilson Kibler Commercial Real Estate. Appreciate everybody's participation in this. A lot of guys in the room from our industry, and was talking with a client yesterday, and he didn't want his name necessarily to be mentioned because he's pretty well known, but he said his father told him that taxes used to be 1 month's rent. He said now they're 3, sometimes more months' rent. So from an investment standpoint, it makes it very challenging to make it worthwhile to want to invest here. Fortunately, the economy is pretty good right now. We've got some good development going on in the industrial area and other areas. But there are people who want to be here, want to invest in the Columbia community. We got a good thing here. So let's help them make their numbers work, because it all comes down to that, and they'll want to be here. And then the other thing we were talking about is how these other communities are able to afford to have much lower taxes because they've got so much investment. When we compare ourselves to Charlotte and the other stuff we were talking about, we were like, well, daggum, no wonder. Their tax base is growing at a much faster rate than what ours is. So thank y'all.
Thank you, George. Appreciate you. Any questions or anything? Brad Davis, Mr. Davis with McCory Construction. Oh, you signed up.
Signed up to speak.
Well, let me.
Just in case.
Yeah. And Brad knows our taxes are too high. Again, I would, and can I just make a comment? Because I was fortunate enough to come hear Daniel speak at their office before the election. And I remember him saying, I asked him, I said, how's business? And he said, we're booming. He said, the problem is we're not booming in Columbia. Most of our business is in other parts of the state. And I'm quoting you correctly on that. And I think that's, I think that's an important thing for us to kind of be thinking about. I use the example of student housing. Think with me for a second. 5-6 years ago, that product didn't exist here. They came with a 50% tax credit program to reduce the property taxes by 50% for 10 years. And in 5 short years, it became the largest payer of property taxes in the city of Columbia. It just makes me wonder, if it has that kind of impact on a specialty thing, what would it do for the small business growth in our city? I think it could be absolutely remarkable. And I'll just tell you, I served as the Secretary of Commerce when Bernie Maybank was the head of DOR. And I'll never forget when we did the orientation at the coordinating council, they asked me what I thought when I got finished. I said, my only regret was being born here instead of moving here from somewhere else. Because the folks that come here get the rewards from the state when it comes to taxes. Our own local guys and gals that are building the businesses from the ground up. I mean, let me tell you, the days of recruiting corporate headquarters they just don't really happen. If we want more corporate headquarters in Columbia, we got to grow our own. We got to see our small businesses like Hal's become big businesses. And that's what the genesis of all this discussion's about. Mr. Mayor, you had a comment you want to make?
I just want to take a minute because I think it'd be great for us to get a show of hands in here. But if we modernize the tax structure, levelize it out, which means every individual owners, big players, everybody's on the same, and we get it down to owner-occupied 4%, how many of y'all, especially you commercial guys in development, have investors lined up or willing to invest more money right now? I'm just curious.
Wow.
I mean, it tells us our case. I mean, everybody who comes to the city, I don't care if you're a small guy or if you're a big guy, taxes are the number one hindrance of the growth. And you've heard the numbers here. These aren't numbers that we're exaggerating. These are real numbers that have backing behind it, and it's why we're not being competitive in the nature. And that's why if you look at the capital cities similar to us in the Southeast have all had double-digit growth, and we've had single-digit growth and low single-digit growth, and taxes are our number one issue. So we have to work together, but I do see this. I mean, we're hearing it, we're going to hear it probably for the next 4 speakers are going to tell us the exact same thing. We have an opportunity to create an environment that's competitive in Columbia that affects everybody from workforce housing to home ownership opportunities to affordable housing, which we need. We're 6,700 units short right now in capital investment. And it's coming to South Carolina one way or another. We just need to be primed to accept it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chuck Sally? Oh, my friend, Mr. McDowell. Chuck, you're up next.
Today is that we got small businesses that are suffering because of our tax structure. We've got communities that are suffering because of our tax structure. It's good to have all of these fine developers in the room today. Thank you all so much for all that you do for this city of ours. But there are communities and places where generational, and it's a redundant issue for me, generational wealth. I think this gives us a unique opportunity to start this process where each of us, whether it's the homeowner, whether it's the small business, whether it's the developer, the real estate person, it gives us an opportunity to not only expand our city, but it also gives us an opportunity to expand the wealth base within our city. Say what you will of me. This conversation today is the kind of conversation I think will not only help the $14,000 tax bill you got on your place, or the issues that Hal Stevenson raises, or the other issues that are voluminous as it relates to small businesses. There is a wealth issue and a wealth concern that sort of undergirds this conversation. And if we don't look at it in a very proactive way, we're going to find ourselves in a quagmire. And that quagmire is simply going to be, show me the money. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman McDowell. Chuck, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. I guess I just wanted to say that I wanted to say, first of all, I applaud y'all very much and say that, you're on the right track, because anything we can do to make property taxes more fair in this city and county and state, we need to do. The debacle that we got into in property taxes was really started with Act 388, when we essentially changed one of the fundamental rules that founded this country, and that's taxation without representation. So what we did was we took all of the school taxes and operating taxes off of the residents, the people that actually were being served by those schools. And before that happened, they actually decided how much they had a referendum and a vote to decide how much they could pay to do that. And when they changed it, all of those people had no reason to not spend as much money as they possibly could, and they did, because the people that were paying for it didn't have a vote. The businesses that were paying for it weren't able to vote and say, no, you can't raise my taxes 300%. You need to scale back this bond. The bonds, they just didn't happen. So now, when you look at high growth areas like Richland District 2, where the millage rate is approaching 600 mills, if it keeps going, it'll be a whole number, in the next decade. And so, if you don't have a way to check that, then, you can't, you're going to have, the growth is going to continue to go down. And the only way that we're doing that in my business right now is by getting special source revenue credits and fee in lieu of tax agreements for all new development. And if you got to do that every single time, just so that you can do a deal, then there's something's wrong with the system. And so I applaud y'all for this. If there was a way that the city of Columbia could actually have an agreement where everything that got developed in it had some type of tax development credit, special source revenue credit, or some other kind of credit, so that you could show you would have more people developing inside the city limits of the Columbia than you would in the county. And if you could do that, then the county might realize, hey, look at the city of Columbia. Their development is growing and ours is shrinking. Why? Because they're providing a tax break for development. And it's really not a break. It's just taking less money. It's taking less money from the businesses that are paying those taxes. And, people think that developers are paying taxes or that owners of investment property pay taxes, and that's simply not true. The businesses that are renting from those owners are the ones that pay the taxes. Whether they're paying it directly, whether they're paying it as a reimbursement for operating expenses, or whether they're paying it as part of their rent, they're the ones that pay those taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Any comments, any questions? Mr. Andy Walker? He had to leave. Quinn Brown. All right. Mr. Stephen Gilchrist.
Mr. Chairman and Mayor, thank you all on the committee for having us today. I've got to run in just a minute, so I'm glad Quinn Brown put his name on the list so I can speak. I'm Stephen Gilchrist. I'm the chairman of the South Carolina African American Chamber of Commerce. I represent over 15,000 minority and black-owned businesses in South Carolina, 900 of which exist right here in Columbia. And I just want to thank the committee for your work on taxes and the tax structure in our city. We did a survey about 2 years ago with our members to find out what were some of the pressing issues as it relates to small business and minority businesses and black-owned businesses in the state. And there were two issues that actually tied for first place. The first one was access to capital, and the second one was high taxes. These two things were issues that these folk felt like were barriers to ensure that they were able to stay in business. And I often talk about, since the pandemic, that we lost 41% of our businesses in the chamber due to COVID. We didn't lose entrepreneurs, but we lost a lot of businesses that had to close. One of the concerns that we have going forward is that we don't want the tax structure within our communities across the state to become another pandemic for small businesses. The the 4% and the 6% rate, this is something that we've looked at quite a bit here. I'm a former county administrator, so all this stuff is interesting to me when it comes to these numbers. And one of the things that often that doesn't get discussed when we're talking about these tax rates, when we talk about 4% versus 6%, particularly for small business people, they see that as a 2% step, not what it actually is in terms of 4% versus 6%, and the amount of money that equates to, particularly if you own multiple dwellings and you're paying taxes on that stuff. So why do I bring that point up? I think it's important to make sure. I remember when Richland County passed their penny sales tax, and we had a conversation with a lot of our businesses here in Richland County. We said, so what do you think about that? And a lot of people said, well, it's just a penny. Well, it wasn't a penny. And I think oftentimes the semantics of what we talk about, particularly as it relates to taxes, is something that I would encourage this committee to work with partners like our chamber and others who can help educate small businesses that don't really get an opportunity to participate in forums like this, to be able to understand exactly how they're being impacted by this work. So my chamber, we have 10, our chamber represents about 90% of businesses that are 10 people or less. And I often talk about the fact that of those businesses, 70% are mom and pop, and the other 30% are mom or pop. And so the reality of that is this is what we're dealing with and why we think it's so important that what you're talking about and what you're doing in your work with regard to the tax structure is so important. One thing that I wanted to, and I'll say this and I'll take my seat, one of the things that I wanted to just put on the radar screen when I looked at the numbers, particularly as it relates to school districts, I was curious whether or not the bond rating was factored into those numbers. Because if we haven't factored the bond rating into those discussions, that's another conversation. And I think Chuck just mentioned the fact that in Richland School District 2, the millage rate is somewhere around 600 mills. That is extraordinarily high. And the reality of that is until we begin to look at some way of minimizing the impact of bonds, we're going to continue to see that kind of thing in our local government. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to come and share this perspective.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, sir, Councilman.
One of the interesting things, of course, is that the number of minority businesses that sort of folded during the last 2 years. Did I hear you say 41%?
41% in our chamber, yes, sir.
The two areas, of course, that were a part of the conversation, of course, was access to capital and, of course, taxes.
Yes, sir.
I can, excuse me, I can understand the impact of particularly African-American minority businesses that sort of weighted down those two initial points.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that I think is critically important for us is that if we're going to look at a tax structure that is going to be vital and implemented in such a way, particularly with minority communities, African-American communities, it has to be so structured where those two ingredients that you talked about initially, be a primary part.
Yes, sir.
Of whether it's the educational piece, whether it's the networking piece, but it has to grow and has to be in such a way that our historical data, I keep going back to that because I think it's important that we understand the historical data comparatively with the growth of the African-American community and minority business person.
Yes, sir. No, I think that's an excellent point, Councilman. And I certainly think that in any time we have the opportunity to make sure that we're educating business people in that regard is something that we should consider. So thank you for bringing that point up.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Last speaker, Jim Morris. All right. How about that? Jim was holding everybody from lunch. I know what it's like to do that. Let me, comments from the committee. Ladies first. Anything, Scotty? Mr. Bennett? Mr. Mayor? We've said it all. Mr. Canny?
I mean, I deal with small businesses. I've worked with Hal before, so, you know, one of my main considerations on here is for small businesses. I mean, I think all my commercial friends out there, I'm excited about that. But just helping the individuals, the landlords, the ones and twos, and is a great help. And I had an owner email me last night, and if I can read this just real quick, it's short. He said, it's Arnold Nurek. He said, growing up in Brooklyn, I became aware of rent control. It was a lifesaver for low to middle income families. 15 years ago, I became involved in the residential rental business. I believe I could provide good housing to low and middle income tenants and earn a reasonable income on my investments. Unfortunately, property taxes amount to 25 to 35% of my rental income. The landlord, coupled with other expenses, forced me to increase rents beyond our tenants' means, and all he pays. I believe tenants would greatly benefit by a gradual reduction in property taxes. If property taxes could be reduced, it would certainly help low to middle income tenants. So he sent that to me last night, but I think that's an important part, too, of what we're doing today.
Reverend? I think we received several emails. Rather than read them all into the record, why don't you just post them online or put them in the file? Because I think you received, what, a dozen or more, probably? Okay. Just, again, I just say that just so everybody understands that there were a lot of more interest than what's here that were unable to be with us today. I want to really kind of close with a couple of three things so our guests kind of understand the process that we're under. Mr. Baybank said it best earlier. I mean, the county really is who controls your property tax. I think what we have at the city level is a group of us that understand, because we're in the city center. We don't see those cranes in downtown Columbia that you see in Charleston or Charlotte or Greenville or Nashville. Somebody told me in Greenville today they're complaining that the cranes are blocking the view of the mountains. They got so many of them. So we've taken the lead to find the solution. And I think we're there. And I think our next meeting, which will be on May the 19th at 2:00 in the afternoon, will probably be our final meeting. I think Dr. Gunlogsden, Dr. Walters, and Charlie Torini will bring our final conclusion and the plan that you've seen outlined today. And our plan is and Charlie, let me just back up. Charlie will probably outline a bit on how we have to accomplish it from the process. It will require, we know it will require some legislation from the General Assembly. I don't think there's anything egregious that we're going to be asking for. These are local taxes. There is no negative or positive fiscal impact to the state general fund except for new investment that we collect that generates new jobs and new sales taxes, new withholding taxes, and so forth. So what we're doing, I think, will have a significant, in a cost-benefit analysis, a significant positive fiscal impact on the state, which I think is good. And then we will hand our plan off to our mayor, who's a businessman by trade, and ask him to gather together our county council leaders, our school board leaders. It's good that we have Mr. Bennett with us, who's the president or the chairman of the Midlands Business Leadership Group, because we need the business community involved, and like I say, and reach the consensus there to move forward, I think, with the special legislation that we need. I thank all y'all for coming today. I think for us to move our community better, more citizen involvement like this, more business involvement like this is critical and crucial. I mean, when I look out here and I see folks who are making it happen in Columbia. And when you tell your elected leaders that it ain't happening, it means more than just the inertia of it. So, again, thank you. Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments before we adjourn? Ms. Hughes, you made a motion to adjourn, didn't you? And Mr. Bennett seconded it? All in favor say aye. Aye. business. Thank y'all for coming. Thank you.